storytelling gold or is it garbage? Come on, tell me what I gotta know. Is the story being told? Garbage or gold? Hey Disney Afternoon gang, welcome back to my channel. My name is Jake. If you're returning, thanks for coming back. And if you're new, I do all kinds of Disney content including subscription boxes, hauls, vintage trips, trivia, movie reviews. If it's Disney, we're doing it, so you're going to want to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on the next Disney adventure. Alright friends, welcome to my new series, Is It Storytelling Gold or Garbage? The series in which we talk about how storytelling is used in a variety of different Disney films. Today we are talking about Encanto, and I wanted to remind you of three things off the bat. First, just because a story has what I would say bad storytelling doesn't mean I don't like it, and just because it has good storytelling devices used doesn't mean I do like it. I'll remind you of the 5 categories of review. They are structure, world rules, stakes, song setup, and miscellaneous category. And then lastly, I'll remind you that the point of storytelling is to communicate. All right, so let's dive on in. I've got my notes here ready to go, and we're going to talk about structure first. And let's talk about the importance of the first 10 to 15 minutes of a film. They are the thing that helps us decide whether we're going to actually stick with the film. Doesn't mean we won't necessarily finish it, but are we on the journey with the character in those 10 to 15 minutes? Did you give me an entrance to the world? Did you make me sympathetic to the hero's plight? Am I invested in this story? So let's talk about the prologue. Not all films use a prologue, but the purpose of a prologue is to give necessary context to the central conflict of the story. It is usually a compressed timeline of events that happens outside of the main timeline or the purview of our story. So, Beauty and the Beast, right? Prime example. We get the whole stained glass window story of how the prince was cursed 10 years prior to our story taking place. Little Mermaid, we get the context of the lore and the generations of lore that have built up about King Triton and the Mer people. Encanto also uses a prologue, but right out of the gate, they get a point for negativity from me for having a double prologue. So they have both Abuela's backstory and Mirabel's kind of coming of age ceremony. And both of these things sort of concur side by side. And I don't know what I'm focusing on. I'm new to this world. I'm new to these characters. I think that I don't know where my focus is supposed to be. There's a sort of traumatic story clearly happening here, and this sort of mysterious sort of question mark story happening here. And there are two kinds of questions you can ask in that scenario when you're presented with information you're not sure about. The first is, what happens next, and how do they get out of that, or how does that play out in the story? Or, what? You hope it's not the latter, but for me, it was. I didn't know where I was focusing on. So, I didn't know why they were forced to flee their home. Like, I get it, there were, assassins or a political army or something came in to drive them out. I also get that the analogy is of people being driven out of their homelands for all kinds of religious persecution and political persecution, etc., etc., etc. And I think that's a beautiful analogy. But I didn't know what the threat of that really was, because it caught me so off guard that I tried to quickly place, like, where am I in history? Where am I in the sort of history of this particular country? And I couldn't reconcile enough things fast enough, and enough information wasn't given to me. And then this candle appears out of nowhere, which I understand is sort of a tenet of magical realism in that the magic is often unexplained, and that's okay. except that I didn't understand how she knew that then they would get these gifts. Like, I get that the magic appeared and the house appeared and they were protected and saved from this sort of invading troop of people. But then these gifts were this other thing of like, how did they know about them? I don't care where they came from. I just want to know how it was explained to her, where she was like, when you're 12 years old, you're going to open a door and a gift is going to appear. I was confused about that. So then we jump ahead to the main timeline of the story. So now we've had 2 timelines, and now we're into the main timeline of the story. And we have these 3 kids, these 3 little town kids who ask Mirabel,
"What's your gift?" "Who's asking?" "Us?"
And she goes explaining all of them in song. She explains it 3 times in succession, each time getting faster, which is kind of a trait, a little bit of Lin-Manuel's, who wrote the songs. In Hamilton, setting up John Lawrence and the Marquis de Lafayette and Hercules Mulligans, he kind of tells about who they are, and then he reduces it by half and tells us again. So he's kind of falling back on that trick. The problem is information is coming at us so fast about so many people that I don't know what I'm looking at. And the song setup felt like a song setup, like, hey. I also didn't believe that these kids wouldn't know. They're like legendary in this town. They've seen Louisa probably out and about lifting things or moving things. They've probably been victims of Peppa and the weather. So I didn't understand what the impetus was for them for asking. We jump to Antonio's party, and we see the second half of the second prologue playing out side by side, where Mirabel doesn't get her gift and Antonio does get his gift. And then in kind of a stopped moment in time, which I actually think works, she asks this "I want" song, which an "I want" song is kind of like the first main time we hear from one of the characters. And yet again, it's the same list of the same traits that we heard already, except that it's in the guise of, I can't control the weather, I can't make things beautiful, I can't shapeshift, I can't hear things, I can't lift things, I'm not strong. Without really telling us anything new, we kind of got that from her. So how could we fix this prologue into the first sort of scene to make it a little bit better? If you had started just with Abuela's backstory about her fleeing, this village being attacked, maybe giving me a little bit more information, but you set it in a really concrete world. You set it in a clearly politically charged time, in a real country, with real people doing real things. And then you showed me the magic appearing out of nowhere that protects them and surrounds them. And we brought those 2 things together. That is a very clear definition of what magical realism is. It should have stopped there, because I would have understood better the rules of the world if you took more time to focus on the rules of the world, saving Mirabel's backstory for later. I then would have used the opening number explaining all of the family's gifts as a oversong. Usually I'm a proponent of characters singing the songs, but I think if you had given me a genealogy, like a family tree visual to go along with Abuela and the 3 children and their children, etc., and their gifts, I think I could have latched onto it a little bit better, because it would have shown the passage of time and given me a little breathing room in order to sort of take in all of that information. I love that it's a multi-generational story. I think that's really fascinating and really important. But it means there's a lot of secondary and tertiary characters. And so you're going to have to give us a little bit of time to warm into that. Had you done all of that, you wouldn't have tipped us off with the second prologue that there's something in Mirabel's past that's an issue or going to be an issue. We would have met our main character, and you could have shown her coming up against the other family members and their gifts, and her not being able to respond with a gift, and slowly leading us into, oh, there's an issue here. Jump to Antonio's party, and I think the pain of moving that second prologue paralleled specifically with Antonio getting his gift and the pain of her not getting her gift, showing those two elements in a way they kind of do on in the film. But I think having saved it till that moment, we would have felt the pain a little bit more acutely in that moment. And then you would have given maybe, hopefully, Mirabel a little better of an I Want song. But that would have, I think, tightened up, show me the rules of the magical realistic world. Give me that timeline and that family genealogy tree, setting up the importance of family, but also clearly delineating the information. And then show me the pain of the side-by-side journey of these two together. For my money, that would have made a stronger and better prologue. The only other thing going to the end of the film that I didn't really understand is if really the answer was for them to accept Mirabel for who she was, why didn't the house start cracking sooner? It was clear that they've sort of been, mean to her a little bit. I didn't understand why in that moment the house was cracking, particularly if Bruno had seen the vision way back then. Okay, let's move on to our second category, the world rules, and in this case, the magic. And I understand, again, the tenet of magical realism that says that we don't want to explain a lot about the history of the magic because we want it to feel like an everyday occurrence, which I think is okay. They call that authorial reticence. There are several tenets of what makes up magical realism, that being one, and Disney sort of picks and chooses a little bit here. But once you've set up a thing, you have to follow through with it, like Peppa. Sometimes they show the weather affecting everybody around her, and sometimes it's just this little, rain cloud on top of her head. And I don't know when or why that happens. And I get the sort of reference to the fact that we don't know when our gifts affect us and when they affect other people, when our choices do. But they played it for laughs, and they played it when it was convenient for the storytelling, not because it was consistent with the world rules. The same thing about Dolores and her hearing. So she can hear Luis's eye twitch, which, seemingly a silent event, but she can't hear the conversation between Mirabel and Bruno in the wall, or she can't hear Mirabel's journey up into the tower. So it's convenient when they want to use that effect, but it doesn't apply across the board. It's like Genie in Aladdin. Genie could have solved all of Aladdin's problem. He had the power to do it. But the story sets up the 3 wishes rule that doesn't make him this sort of all-powerful being that can fix things. So Aladdin is always in sort of the throes of deciding between, like, do I use my wish? Do I fix my problems? There are rules about it, and they have to be consistent. Stakes. So what if they lose their gifts? So what? I didn't understand why the gifts were important. I understood why the house was important because it seemingly protected them, but I didn't understand why the gifts were important. They keep saying the community is counting on them. For what? Why did they inherit this burden of the community counting on them? What does the community give back to them? So then let's move on to song setup. One of the old adages in musical theater is show, don't tell. Don't tell me you're angry, throw the lamp, right? And Lin-Manuel Miranda, who wrote all the songs for this film, is really excellent at the tell, don't show kind of songwriting. It's not a fault. It's just, it can be a storytelling problem. It works really well in Hamilton, which I'm a big fan of Hamilton, but Hamilton is essentially a musical documentary. And documentaries are in the tell, don't show category because they're responsible to communicate a large amount of information, dates and figures, facts, all of that kind of thing. And so that sort of songwriting works really well in that setting. I think it's less effective here and less effective in more traditional storytelling. So let's talk about, we talked about the opening number as part of our prologue journey. Let's talk about Surface Pressure, which is my favorite song actually in the film, but it feels a little bit unearned. Out of the blue, Luisa starts singing this sort of song that doesn't feel like, there's a difference between not earning it and sort of surprising us with it, and also kind of building to the moment where a release of a song feels natural and organic. This is not built to that moment for me. Luisa, in fact, of all of the characters, Luisa is the one I'd expect last to sing a song. So she sings about the pressure of her gift, but also worried about losing it. So we're set up with this conflict that has no resolution. I was confused by some of the imagery, you know, the circus, Hercules, the Titanic. They don't feel very organic to Louisa or her culture or her time period, but they feel very much like, oop, there's the writer talking. Oop, there's a clever rhyme. It doesn't feel like that's what the character would reference or that's what the character would actually sing about. It's this music video format. A lot of the songs are in this music, which I actually don't mind necessarily and think animation can do really well. I think about like Colors of the Wind and that chalk sequence that goes through the middle of that song, which I just think is gorgeous. But it's very surreal. It's very unrealistic of the moment, right? But the problem with a lot of these songs are the storytelling's going along. It stops. It takes us up to a song and then brings us back down to the same moment we left and moves forward. When the trajectory actually should be building upwards to a song releases and carries us like, you know, being shot out of a cannon farther down the road in the story. We get somewhere. There's a journey. This is a one-note idea that takes us up and takes us down. It's like that hot air balloon at Disney Springs, which I've tried to ride multiple times, and every time it's like too windy of a day. Okay, moving on to We Don't Talk About Bruno, that chart topper that everybody's tapping their toes to. Again, more telling, less problematic in some ways, but I don't know who the audience is. Who are you telling your little snippets to? I guess in a way it's kind of Mirabel, but it feels like she would know part of this already. Like it would be, it's not like, you know, her family is keeping a secret, which obviously families are great at keeping secrets, but the whole town has an experience, a negative experience with Bruno, and I'm hard-pressed that everybody kept it a secret. So it feels like we are the audience rather than someone organically in the story. The song setup feels all wrong. It's almost incidental. Peppa overhears Bruno being mentioned when Mirabel is, she's caught by her father when she has the miracle back. And it just launches into this song that hadn't been earned. She's like, come on, I heard Bruno, I'm going to sing a song now. And I don't, yeah, it again, doesn't follow that trajectory that a song should have. And then it ends with Mirabel saying, I never should have asked about Bruno. And she kind of didn't reel it. Like I get, she went and found the miracle or the prophecy, but she didn't really directly ask the question. And then the last song we'll talk about is What Else Can I Do? So Mirabel goes to kind of make peace with her sister Louisa, and Louisa sort of launches into this song sort of mid-argument, mid-stride. Again, it's like dialogue, halt, song, right? It's this very 90-degree parallel motion thing. Louisa goes on to explain the obvious. I get very frustrated with lyrics that state the obvious. Frozen, shall we quote, the window is open, so's that door. Very good. Very, very, very good. You're pointing out the obvious, like there's a bed and there's a floor. Okay. She starts by, I just made something unexpected, something new, something sharp. Yeah, I see all those things. It doesn't launch me into the feeling of like, oh, now I have to sing this. There's no reason. It's very unearned. They're oddly self-aware of who they are and what they are. And then suddenly out of the blue, because she made a cactus, which I guess is an undesirable of the flowers, she wants to do something new, and they're launched into this sort of sisterly duet of sort of being themselves with chalk flying everywhere. They wanted us to get to this moment and didn't really know how, and they just were like, well, here we are, we've arrived. And it just doesn't pay off for me. All right, miscellaneous. There's always some miscellaneous things that sort of don't fall anywhere. So when there's this moment when Mirabel is she's on the roof going up to the candle, and Abuela appears at the window, and Mirabel sort of hides so Abuela doesn't see her. And Abuela kind of talks these plot points out loud to herself at the very moment that Mirabel happens to be there. So it's a little like that Deus Ex Machina of like, ooh, we need a thing to happen. I guess she overhears it. And overhearing something is one of the oldest and sort of cheap tricks in the book because it feels so coincidental when it's so major to the plot. It's really, in literature, it's the inciting incident, right? It's the thing that it's Luke's parents being killed that kick him into high gear after he's met Obi-Wan, and it's kind of like, I don't want to go on the journey. And then it's like, well, you kind of got to go on the journey now. It's a big moment in the story. And so this feels so forced at this really crucial moment of the story. I didn't understand why the family was so hard on her. Like, I get that they sort of feel bad for her, but it felt more like cruel and bullying to a certain degree more than pity and sort of like, isn't she sad, right? And then again, at the very end, we come back to the river and Abuela and Mirabel are there. And you think you're going to get more information. Like you're going to, all these little moments, you know, from the beginning till now are finally going to pay off. You're going to learn something. And while there's an emotional and familial reconciliation that happens, which needed to happen, we learn nothing. We learn nothing. It's just a rehash of everything we've had before. And it doesn't take us anywhere. Okay, I think it's clear where I fall on this first film here. But I thought, let's talk about a couple of things that this movie does right, because there's a lot to like. It's a gorgeous film. I will rarely evaluate the animation quality in most of these films because it's Disney's bread and butter. It's one of the things they do. It's the thing they do exceptionally better than anybody else. The characters are great. I think they're fun characters. I think Mirabel is a lovable hero. So that you know, I relate to some of that. I love the multi-generational aspect about that. I think there's a beautiful message about accepting people for who they are. And, you know, there's always that one in every family.
Two in mine, actually.
Where they're perceived being lesser. They didn't go to college. They... you know, they don't have a lot of aspiration. They, you know, they've made some mistakes, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that message of overcoming that sort of, you know, that sort of branding is an important message. I like the political message at the beginning, the people leaving their country to seek asylum someplace else. The political component is another element of the magical realism that's thrown in there, and I really like that. I just wish it had bigger payoff somehow. It's kind of, that's why I had questions about who they were. Not because I actually cared who they were, but because I wanted to know, that's the story that drew me in. And then it never paid off at the end. And then Abuela not putting the experience of her trauma on the family is such a powerful message. It's that whole sins of the father kind of concept, right? Where we inherit the mistakes of our parents. Children will listen, right? And this was about her trauma being the thing that kind of keeps everybody sort of locked in and forced into her narrative. And she needs to let go. The problem is that when the house falls, which clearly the house being sort of the world that she built and no longer is necessary because maybe that threat, that political or that army threat is no longer there. It falls, it doesn't mean anything. And then Mirabel builds the same thing again, rather than building something new. I just felt like there was a missed opportunity there to connect that. But the message, I think, is really incredibly powerful. Those are my thoughts on my first film. I'd love to know down in the comments how you experienced the film. What was your emotional reaction to the film? What was your takeaway from the film? Did you like the film? Did you not like the film? I'm hoping that we just start a dialogue about how storytelling works and how storytelling delivers, rather than, I hate this film, I love this film, and then we're these warring factions. Let's come at it with some evidence and some thought behind it, because it's important to present your argument with, you know, real thought rather than just knee-jerk reaction. Like this video. If you're new and you like this kind of content, please hit subscribe. I've got one of these coming out every week, plus other kinds of content. This Saturday is our Year of the Year, released in the morning. Always a creative good time. And then at 7 o'clock on this Saturday night, we are live on the Siskateers channel. And we're going to be talking about the experience of Year of the Year. Going to be a great time. Thank you all for watching, and I hope to see you soon on the next Disney Afternoon.